Prosecutors at this hour alleging former New Orleans Mayor Cantrell and her former bodyguard Jeffrey Vappy withheld evidence in the case against them. Chris Welty explains the new details. Chris.
Liz, in a new filing, the government focused on 2 rings Cantrell received and campaign money allegedly used for personal expenses. Prosecutors want to use this evidence against the pair during their trial. There are no new charges. The government says Cantrell received 2 rings from Vappy, a diamond ring and a gold NOPD ring. Prosecutors say Cantrell produced the diamond ring for inspection to the government as part of its subpoena, but Vappy did not produce any records on the diamond ring. According to prosecutors, neither Cantrell or Vappy acknowledged existence of the golden NOPD ring. The filing says, quote, overwhelming evidence, however, indicates Cantrell possessed both rings at the time she received the subpoena. The government cites WhatsApp messages and social media posts showing Cantrell wearing the golden NOPD ring as early as December 2021 and the diamond ring on her left-hand ring finger as early as January 2022. Her official portrait portrays her wearing both rings. The government also alleges Cantrell misused campaign funds for most monthly alcohol purchases during the first months of the COVID pandemic, then mischaracterized their purpose on financial disclosures to the Louisiana Board of Ethics. Cantrell is also accused of spending campaign funds on personal clothing. The government claims Cantrell manufactured a sham consulting agreement. Prosecutors say Cantrell was confronted by an associate labeled as Associate A about her misusing public funds. Cantrell disagreed about those concerns. A hearing on the government's motion to admit evidence is set for April 21st. Liz?